And so I think that it gets to be kind of a complicated thing. I think I can get behind more of the, the shadows and the working in the dark and, all that kind of stuff as shady business practices. I'm not so sure I'm ready to crucify the countries that take advantage of that within their own country. I mean,
Well,
if you're in a country
less
that,
about the countries and more about the companies that see the business
yeah,
opportunity in doing that. Do you think that? Do you? I guess this kind of this.
yeah,
It's
it's like selling
this.
weapons, man. I mean, people, I mean, if it's not illegal or if it is illegal and you don't think you'll get caught and you think there's a way to make money at it, then there's plenty of people that are going to take advantage of it and do it. I think this is just a fact of life.
So then that's I'm glad you said that because that's where I was hoping you'd go with this because it gets also into this notion of nation states having hacker for hire type business models that they're okay hiring a company like NSO Group and do you think that nation states that do think that it's okay to hire a third party to do hacker for hire inside their country, do you think that that's a good image for our industry?
A good image for our industry. No, I don't think it's a good image for people to be willing to be hired out to another nation's. I mean, look, Neil. At the end of the, it's another form of it's mercenary, right?
Right, exactly.
It's operations in another domain. People don't want to talk about cyberspace as a domain of warfare, but just like the air domain or the maritime domain, there's commercial uses of it, there's personal uses of it, and there's strategic conflict uses of it. And so cyberspace is clearly that way. So no, I would prefer that companies didn't hire themselves out to nation states to do that kind of work. And no, I don't think that's the area that I would want to be associated with. Uh, but people are going to do it, right? They're going to go and they're going to make money and they're going to do it. So,
Capitalism at its finest, I guess, right? I
yeah.
think on
To,
that
to me, well, if I could,
yeah, go
Neil,
for it.
and you may not want to go here, but what
Go
I
for
think
it.
the discussion that I think is kind of tangent. It's probably not tangential, maybe analogous. Is the different views nation states have on using the same people to do government operations as they used to do private operations or
Mm.
commercial operations. The Chinese are known for this. We think the Russians do that, although they hide it a little better. But the same PLA hacker that's working during the day, whose now picture is in the post office here because we've indicted him, has also been working for pick a company and finding things that could be useful for those commercial opportunities. And it's a different culture. We don't agree with it. We would say that that's wrong, that's illegal, but it's not wrong and illegal in China. So we've got to be prepared to deal with that.
No, that's exactly where I wanted to go with this because I've held this notion for a while, right? From my time in the Air Force and since getting out, right, is we do see the China, the PLA, the Russian, and this goes back to some of the older Russian Business Network, the RBN stuff that was done years and years ago, right? Where they incentivize their civilian hackers to basically conduct operations both for themselves for monetary gain and then for the nation
Mm-hmm.
state as well. And as we walk down this line, no, that's very much where I wanted to go with this conversation. Is when you look at our and thank you very much back to the question earlier about if we were prepared to deal with Russian or Chinese pervasiveness in our network is do you think that the U.S. needs to have a more formalized cyber militia similar to how Russia and China utilize their civilian hacking force?
No, I think that we need to figure out better how to um, leverage the what I would call appropriate roles and responsibilities on each side. It's and here's the reason why is that I can give you several reasons why. I go back to the Sony hack, right? And when the United States government, because I can tell you at that time, based on the nature of the administration, very hesitant to come out and out anybody, right? So when they came out and said that the North Korean, I was not in the government at that time, when they came out and said the North Koreans did that hack, there was no doubt in my mind the North Koreans did it. And then you see all these technical people, saying, no, because if you look at the malware and you look at the this and you look at the that, it could have been this, it could have been that. These are people that I think do not understand the full capability of the United States government to leverage what we call all sorts of intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. Technical intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, diplomatic intelligence, right? That when you bring the full weight of that machine to bear, you can start figuring things out. As hard as it is to anonymize things that go on cyberspace, there's a lot of stuff you can figure out, right? And so that information, that level of expertise is held in the government, and it's not held sufficiently in the private sector. And so if we let people operate in the private sector, in that role, then I think we bring a lot of risk onto ourselves in terms of not having the right targets. It's hard enough if you're really good at this to understand what I call cascading effects, mm-hmm. right? I meant to hit that missile site, and I actually shut down all the power to the ATMs or to the hospitals, right? That understanding all of those collateral and cascading effects is really difficult. But Neil, at the next level up is where it really gets important. It's understanding how these activities fit into a national strategy and how important it is to consider that, because there's a lot of theory. Some of it's in deterrence theory, but just messaging and signaling theory, right? What I said is not nearly as important as what you heard. So let's take the North Koreans, for example, and the Sony hack. You remember shortly after that, there was some kind of disruption in the North Korean internet, for whatever right. The North Korean internet is, both pops, that kind of thing. But anyway, but there was some disruption in North Korean internet, and the U.S. government said we had nothing to do with it, an anonymous or somebody else. So, we did. But at the end of the day, the North Koreans are trying to interpret all of this, and what does that mean to them, and what signal is being sent to them? Because it's just like when we hit the Chinese embassy in Kosovo, right? We hit what we're aiming at. We put bombs in pickle barrels, right? That doesn't mean we aren't going to hit the wrong thing, right? Because sometimes the intelligence fails, right? But we generally hit what we're aiming at. Now, you take that into cyberspace, that becomes much more difficult. I could go on a whole nother rant about we haven't demanded the same precision from cyber weapons that we demand from kinetic weapons, which makes kinetic weapons easier to authorize than cyber weapons. That's a separate rant. But the point is that as hard as this is to do right inside the government and get it integrated with the rest of your strategy, because go to the Iranians, right? The Iranians got all sorts of pressure. They've got the sanctions on them. They've got the internal tensions with, their neighbors back and forth across the Arabian or Persian Gulf, depending on which side of the argument you're on. They've got the involvement of the Russians. They've got the Israelis. All of this is going on, right? And so when something blows up, right, was that a cyber thing? Was that intended for me? Was that accidental? How am I supposed to interpret that? And if I don't react, am I going to lose some capability, right? And so it is very complex how we weave activities in cyberspace into this larger strategic context to make sure that what we meant to influence, what we meant to do, what we meant to achieve was perceived the same by the other decision maker. And so other than those few reasons, I think it's a great idea to have a cyber militia. I think if they're going to have a cyber militia, we ought to bring them together, the best minds, to decide how we're going to get better at being resilient, defending ourselves, taking a collective defense approach, figuring out how to effectively share with the government. But I believe the government's role is very specifically to operate in gray and red space and stop and block things before they get here, and to share intelligence that cannot be gained legally in any way other than under government authorities, and to figure out now how to coordinate with the private sector to make them better at doing the defensive part of that.
So with that in mind, and I know that over the years I've worked collaborated with several peers in my industry where we've talked about, this idea of hackback. And I think that idea of hackback has kind of graduated into this idea of active defense. But then we still have folks kind of throw that very clickbaity title out there about doing hackbacks and things like that. I take it from your comments there, you're probably not a fan of hackbacks, but could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, and why you think that hackback may or may not necessarily be a good thing for corporations?
I just, for what I said, there's not enough for the people that have access to all the intelligence and all the visibility. There's not sufficient predictability. There's not sufficient precision in the targeting. We're getting there on the government side, and we've made a lot of progress over the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, it's come a long way since I left Cyber Command, but there's no way that all of the tools that are necessary to be able to do that with the right amount of precision, and to be able to coordinate it with national strategic policy, that's not going to happen by these cyber, a cyber militia or anything like that. And what it's going to do is it's going to complicate what we're trying to do on the national strategy side, because we've got all of these operations going on that the adversary doesn't know, is this really the US government trying to signal me or influence my behavior, or is this somebody else? And so I am a firm believer that let's leave the gray and red space operations to the United States government, and let's concentrate all the brilliant capabilities we have on this side to figuring out how to share that information back and forth in a way that we can do that. Because in a similar way, there's people, back at Cyber Command, we were forming different things. They were called cyber protection teams. And I was I kind of led the development of all this cyber mission force and this. And, people in Cyber Command or people in the Pentagon would talk about, well, we've got to be able to dispatch these teams out to the banks and the energy or whatever. That's the last thing they want. You can't be effective at having some dude that's normally working in the government every day. Now he's going to come wandering in your bank network or your energy network and be productive in 12 hours. Now there are some roles for that in the National Guard, for example, with people who are doing that work in their day job, et cetera. That's a different thing. But to me, that's not the help that the private sector needs. And
it would take them a month to get up to speed anyway if they were to come out there.
Right, exactly. So at the end of the day, now I will give you one example of what I would call the closest thing to hackback that I saw, and this was something I heard about when I was at Microsoft. This was a long time ago, but they had through a legal process using actually 19th century chattel law, the same kind of law where we authorized merchant ships, because the United States didn't have enough armed forces to defend themselves against the Barbary pirates. They had authorized merchants to be able to arm themselves and protect themselves. And so utilizing that law, Microsoft had a case where somebody had compromised some servers, et cetera. And what they did was they went to court and they said, we've identified where this is. We have identified what's going on. U.S. government, are you going to do anything to stop this? No, we can't, or we won't, or whatever. Okay, then we would like authorization to take these actions. And what they had to do was, wherever it was, someplace in Eastern Europe, put a full page ad in the newspaper saying, whoever it was, you're required to come to court in New York City on April 13th and, blah, 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 blah. And if you don't, we're going to take actions to stop you. And then roughly what they did was, of course, nobody showed up. And by the way, this was the most expensive part of the entire deal, was posting that ad. But what happened was it was one of those deals where, the next time let's call it the hacker came into whatever server, they, thought they were getting what they wanted, and what they sent back, crashed the server on that end or destroyed the tool or something like that. So they didn't actually reach out into red space. But even what I just described, I'm not an expert on this, but I think there's some legalities around even that type of action. But they went through the legal process. They went through all the wickets. And, to me, that's about as far as I'd like to see somebody hack back from the private sector.
For up-to-the-minute cybersecurity news, make sure you follow and subscribe to the Cyber and Security channel on Twitch and YouTube. Also, make sure you turn on those notifications so that you know when we go live.